Good morning to you all. Welcome to Fake News, the broadcaster's dilemma. Now, over the next hour, we'll be discussing the many challenges that we in the media face as agents of disinformation deliberately seek to undermine what we're doing, while often well-meaning shares of misinformation are making our jobs of debunking fake news even more difficult. Now, our panel faces these challenges in their work every day, and it's a difficult one, I think that's fair to say, and we've got Mariana Spring, good morning Mariana, who has quite a unique role, the BBC's first disinformation reporter. We'll find out a little bit more about that in a moment. Matthew Price is editor of data and forensic journalism at Sky News. Morning, Matthew. And Deborah Turness, you're familiar with from the last session, of course, CEO of ITN. Good morning. We'll get their insights shortly, but I want to get all of you involved as much as possible as well. So, obviously, you've all downloaded the RTS app, haven't you? Okay, I'm going to ask you to take part in some voting. So this is one of the sessions, of course, have your phones on, get the app up if you can, if you've loaded it onto your phones. If you navigate to this session on the app, it's session 13. And then in the schedule, and you can scroll down and there are going to be a series of live polls that you can see. And all of the votes in this session are going to be there in front of you, but we'll go through them one step at a time, if that's all right. So for those of you who have it up, if you don't, you can please feel free to download it right now if you can. We're going to start with a little test for you because it's still quite early in the morning for some of you, and find out how good you are at spotting fake or doctored images from real ones. So we're going to show you 4 images, and I'd pretty much like you to respond pretty instantly if you can with your vote. Do you think it's real? Do you think it's not? It's quite simple. So let's go to the first one, shall we? Now, this image, doing the rounds in July, you may be familiar with it, purports to show a real-life SpongeBob SquarePants and his best friend, Patrick Star, I'm sure you're all familiar with the characters, under the sea. Is this image real or fake? Vote now. Okay, the room is divided. The room is, Deborah, you seem quite shocked there. The room is divided.
It just went backwards as well, the little thing.
Oh, so more of you are voting, more of you thinking it's real.
There you go. Oh, look.
Still voting, okay.
Impressive.
So if we say about 2/3 of you in the room think it's real, 2/3 of you are correct. The photo is of an underwater sponge and a starfish taken during an exploratory dive conducted by the NOAA research vessel Oceana Explorer. I suppose that was just a little teaser, but I think what it does show is that it's quite easy to be suspicious, isn't it? Here's another one, a second one. A famous image you'll all be very familiar with. There we go. Abraham Lincoln from the 1860s. Real or fake? Okay. So similar percentages, but the other way around. Still voting. Again, 2/3 of you think it's fake this time, a third of you think it's real. The 2/3 majority is correct. It is fake. The original, which we will show you, was an engraving of the former Vice President, John C. Calhoun. Now, Lincoln's head was added later. Other details of the image were altered. Both images are held by the Library of Congress. I think we'll make it slightly more difficult now. So this one, the third image. This was featured in a celebration of Adobe Photoshop's 25th anniversary. Real or fake? Okay, 3/4 of you thinking it's real. It is. It's a photo by Natalie Fletcher. Well done. And the last one, and this is one that you will be very familiar with, I'm sure. It was shared online during the height of the COVID crisis in India. Is it real or is it fake? Okay, slightly. Ooh. Okay, I'm going to give it a couple of seconds. I think lots of you getting your votes in. Bit of a trick question, to be completely fair. It is real, but. It shows a patient outside a hospital in India. It was taken in 2018. The context of it was used differently. So I think you've done pretty well, actually. But I think one of the points of this session is to show that lots of us aren't equipped to spot fakery, and there is a lot of it around. So one of the questions we're asking ourselves is, how does the media stop itself from falling into the trap of compounding the problem?
They just won't die, those zombie rumours. But what mis- and disinformation don't have in common with The Walking Dead is speed. Forget that maxim about a lie travelling halfway around the world before the truth has got its shoes on. Thanks to the internet, fake news can perform multiple laps of the world faster than a fact checker can say debunk. And the problem for all of us is this: fake news has been weaponised.
So if you're a conspiracy theorist, you haven't really got a very large audience. So your end goal is to have the biggest microphone possible. And so who has that? Well, the mainstream media still has that. So ultimately, the idea is to weaponize the media into ultimately telling that story. And unfortunately, even a debunk, if done irresponsibly, can do exactly what they're looking for, which is to provide this platform that they wouldn't normally have.
The foot soldiers in this misinformed march towards the mainstream are everyday users faced with the daunting task of working out what's real and what's not. The trouble is, we're pretty bad at it, particularly when all the information that comes with a fully blown three-dimensional world is stripped away and we're left with a still image. But we don't realise we're bad at it, which is bad.
We call this the ignorance-arrogance combination. You're bad at something, but you don't know you're bad at it. You have this very high certainty of a very wrong assessment. And that is a very dangerous combination when the average person is looking at an image. We didn't evolve to question the reality in front of our eyes. That's not something that we're particularly good at because it was not necessary. But now we're being asked to reason about the world in a very different way than what our visual system evolved to do.
We're inclined to believe what we see, unless we don't want to. If you're fishing for fakery, you might mistake the tiny imperfections in a compressed photo as a sign it's been manipulated. Then there's the all-important context, when what you see isn't manipulated but misrepresented. Wrong time, wrong place, or just misunderstood. From chaos comes conspiracy, and health warnings don't really make up for giving a lie a little nudge. Take this footage from Afghanistan that took flight recently. Interpreted at its worst, this was the Taliban apparently lynching someone from a helicopter. Some reports injected their headlines with inverted commas, while others warned of shocking images. The shocking images of the Taliban trying and failing to attach a flag to a pole. The Taliban falling foul of misinformation won't trouble many, but the darker reading of those images says something about how misinformation works.
We're in a prison here. People don't even realise we're in a prison.
But you're walking free here.
Have you ever been to a rally before? Who are you representing?
Sky News.
Oh, right, well, that says it all, doesn't it? That says it all, part of the cabal.
Mistrust thrives in this realm. Believe no one, seek your own answers, defend your own truth.
There's a fraud behind a lot of it.
I think it's a nefarious agenda to strip away our freedom.
USA! This is exactly what was feared.
And we've seen what can happen when people believe one narrative over another.
You guys did this to us! We want our country back!
But storming government buildings aside, what's wrong with a healthy dose of skepticism? After all, journalists ask questions. Why shouldn't everybody?
Usually the questions are formulated in such a way that only a conspiracy theory can provide the relevant answer. And this is important because it suggests that conspiracy theories articulated as, well, we're simply asking questions, means that mainstream media will occasionally engage with conspiracy theories also through asking questions.
Cue those clickbaity headlines that inadvertently feed the beast. However, newsrooms around the world have been ramping up efforts to combat fake news, often with a specialist beat. Fact checkers and data specialists complement reporters dedicated to correcting false stories. But there are many traps, including the efforts of bad actors to catch journalists out as they compete with one another.
Newsrooms are being weaponized. They are vulnerable to attack by disinformation agents. journalists have always been trained to believe that more sunlight is a disinfectant. The more we report on something, the better that is. But actually, that has now been used against journalists. And that's fundamentally what journalists need to understand, which is like, how am I being used today? And that's a very different feeling that we've never really had to deal with in the same way.
Fundamentally, the media has to understand how it all works, the tactics, the techniques, the manipulation of all of us, while reporting the harm that's being done. Just debunking fake news isn't enough. And in our coverage, there's a tipping point to think about. When should fake news get our attention? Report too early, and we risk breathing life into disinformation that may not otherwise have gained traction. Report too late, and it may swell the ranks of all the other zombie rumours out there. Either way, audiences need our help to find a way through the nightmare, if they trust us enough to listen.
I think maybe I should have put a health warning there, because when I first saw it, I was a bit scared, so apologies if any of you are a bit squeamish. Mariana, Matthew, Deborah, welcome. Mariana, let's start with you. So, the BBC's first disinformation reporter. I've got to ask, was that the job title you applied for, or was it?
It was, and it is. And it's a very long title as well. It's Specialist Disinformation and Social Media Reporter. And essentially what that means is that I investigate usually the real-world impact of online disinformation, conspiracies, trolling. And during the pandemic, that's obviously been a very, very busy job. But actually, it's also been busy around the US election, looking ahead at climate disinformation, looking at online hate and trolling, which we've had lots of conversations about after the Euros, but also more broadly.
How do you make sure that you do this without giving undue prominence to misinformation?
I think what's crucial is all about how I frame my reporting and how our team do. So I work with a brilliant team at the BBC, our disinformation team, that's made up of experts with different skills. So we have Reality Check, and they do great fact checking, both about what's online and offline. We have BBC Monitoring, who analyse what's being shared, who track the spread of disinformation, where it's coming from, how widely it's being shared. And we have BBC Trending that investigate the dark underbelly of the internet. And I effectively straddle all of those teams, with my focus being on the human cost of online misinformation. And for us, that's often the bar. When it's causing real-world impact, we've seen violence inspired by online disinformation. We've seen people come to harm, psychologically, personally, families break down, but also people who have lost their lives because they have been dissuaded from having a vaccine by bad information, or because they thought COVID wasn't real, it wasn't serious, and ended up becoming really poorly. So this isn't just some kind of niche, quirky, interesting hobby about online conspiracies. Actually, it is really destroying and impacting people's lives. And by focusing on the victims of these online conspiracies, and also the tactics of the bad actors, I think we can avoid the undue amplification of those who are trying to spread disinformation and harm others.
Matthew, you're doing something similar. Your data team is also in this sphere. So what sort of work have you been engaged with?
So one of the great pleasures what I'm doing now is working with a lot of young people like Mariana, who are really trailblazing in this area. And in my unit, we've got data journalists and forensic OSINT journalists. And the data journalists, I guess you could say similar to what Reality Check is doing. Essentially, what's the information out there? What's the data we've got on this? Let's compile it. Let's put it into visualizations so that people can actually understand what the numbers are telling us and what the data is telling us. And that hopefully then gives some context. So for instance, when you've got concerns over the vaccine and particular health problems, you can actually show in context the statistics on those. And I think that's one important side of the coin. But the other side of the coin is using the forensic journalism to look into, is this image real or fake? And we can talk about some of the sort of technological ways in which we can do that in a bit, I think. But also using, for instance, all of the open source information that's out there. So they're looking into using satellite imagery and seeing what's changing on the ground in particular parts of the world to try and tell stories. Both of them are two sides of the same coin, I think. Both of them are exposing what we've got in front of us on the internet often and in data sets, and using those to hopefully paint a true picture of what's happening in the world.
Quite different to what you used to do.
There aren't so many bullets flying over my head. Although I'm not sure Mariana would agree it's particularly
different kinds of bullets, I think,
exactly.
Mariana, which we will come across as well. Deborah, ITN, how's it tackling the problem?
Well, so I want to first say that, I think, Matthew and I worked together for a period at NBC where I lured him out of the BBC to do this kind of work. And I do believe what you're describing are the tools and techniques that we can use to combat the tools and techniques described in the film that those who want to spread fake news are using. So we have to be much more strategic and much more focused on all this work. So ITN, I think probably the proudest example of sort of combating fake news out there has been around. In fact, it's probably one of the first fact check sites, which is Channel 4's Fact Check. Yep. Service, which has been around since 2005. They were the quickest on the Brexit bus story, etc. Breaking down fact and using different tools to examine and share the evidence that we have to, I suppose, to create information that audiences can trust because they've seen more around the transparency of the information that we're sharing. And I think that's important. The point there made in the film as well about amplification. Which pieces of fake news do you choose to debunk? Because you might actually be giving it more oxygen. And Fact Check is very specifically careful about that. And they only tackle the stories that have already really been widely shared and spread, or they've been retweeted by a sort of a mainstream account and really need debunking. And I think there's a danger there. Some of the work that Facebook are doing, and it's laudable that they're tackling fake news, but sometimes when you're debunking something that hasn't actually had many shares and likes, you're perpetuating the story, But we're very proud of the Fact Check brand, and we do have plans to actually invest in it and to sort of create some sort of visual investigations brand with it. And you're seeing excellent work being done at the BBC by you, Mariana, but also Africa Eye. It's got incredible investigations, New York Times. I think it's something that audiences really want now, that transparency to see how we have done the debunking so they can know that's true.
How does it differ, with your experience? I'm going to tap in with the United States and over here. How is that differing in terms of what audiences want?
Where to begin? Look, I think that in the United States, we see greater social division, and that social divide pervades everything in society. And you saw the images there of what happened at the Capitol, which is sort of the, perhaps the greatest example of where that leads, that division, that misinformation, and that lack of social cohesion, which is in part created by the media. I think there is a problem in the United States. It exists here as well. We failed to see Brexit coming. The United States failed to see Trump coming. I would say the fact that in the United States, all media outlets pretty much failed to see the Capitol riots coming, yet Robert Moore, ITN, very proudly, long-standing ITN correspondent, was in the right place at the right time on the steps of the Capitol with those protesters. Why? Well, because he was listening. He had been to, the Rust Belt. He'd gone to the flyover states that perhaps some US media still don't go to understand the people, how they feel, and he knew what they were planning because he was actually sort of on the ground with them. And I think that's a massive lesson that has yet to be learned. And hence there continues to be a division. There's a perception that, most American media are targeting the elites on two coasts, and there isn't a sense of understanding or listening to a very, very large proportion of the population who therefore turn to fake news, to the echo chamber that affirms them because they don't feel understood by the mainstream media.
Mariana, you've got a very interesting story about Patricia's foot.
I do.
Can you tell me about Patricia's foot?
I was talking about Patricia's foot, or I think Patricia's foot is important because actually it tells us a lot about how this online disinformation ecosystem works. And it's not quite so simple anymore as fact-checking, debunking, and then moving on. I think alone that is not enough, although it's a really important facet of what journalists are doing. But a story like Patricia's sort of explains why that is.
So what happened?
So Patricia, a picture of Patricia's foot, which was not very nice, and thankfully we're not showing you, covered in boils and all sorts of things, went viral with people claiming that her foot had swollen up and she was really, really unwell because she'd taken part in the Pfizer vaccine trial. And this picture started popping up on my social media feed, being shared by a number of conspiracy influencers and activists here in the UK, and I started to think, I want to get to the bottom of this. I want to see where this has come from. The picture led back to a GoFundMe page that had been created by someone who had unfortunately mistakenly jumped to the conclusion, they were a friend, a relative of Patricia, who lives in the States, jumped to the conclusion that she had been injured in this vaccine trial. And then the picture had been picked up and misappropriated by anti-vaccine activists online who wanted to dissuade people from having the vaccine. So the first thing I had to do was find Patricia, which was no mean feat, mainly because everyone in Houston, Texas, where she was from, appears to be called Patricia. So I added 100 people on Facebook, all called Patricia, and she'd obviously changed her name because she was being subject to quite a lot of abuse from these activists from all sides. And I spent hours and hours trawling through these Facebook accounts. And I remember calling up my editor. I said, I cannot find Patricia. And he was like, well, if you can't find Patricia, we can't cover the story. Because that's part of the problem. You need to get to the bottom of this. And in the same way with any kind of reporting, be able to definitively say, here's what happened, and here's why it happened, and here's why this is wrong. It turned out that actually Patricia, who I finally found because her name was Patricia, something funny like Kitty Cat, something else, I can't remember. Obviously. And I FaceTimed her on Thanksgiving, I remember it really well, and she was crying and straightening her hair and telling me about how this awful thing had happened with this picture of her foot. And her foot was really sore, but it turned out it was unrelated. It was a reaction to another drug that she was taking. And actually, she was very helpful. I spoke to her doctors. I spoke to those running the vaccine trial who were all able to confirm that she'd actually had the placebo. So she hadn't even had the vaccine in the first place. But verifying these kinds of stories is so complicated because they involve medical records, they involve personal details, and often people are unwittingly exploited by anti-vaccine activists who will misappropriate their stories, and we've seen that happen a lot, which is worlds apart from legitimate medical discussions or political debates we might have about vaccines or side effects or everything else.
Deborah touched upon the idea of a story and how big it is before you actually start tackling it when something's gone viral. Matthew, journalism still, at the end of the day, is journalism. So just getting those smaller stories, or what are considered smaller stories, right. If we do that, that lays a solid foundation, doesn't it?
Well, look, Marianne's just absolutely nailed the point there. It's still about journalism, and it's still about checking, well, is this story about some woman in Texas' foot true? And if you just continue to keep that at the heart of everything you do, it doesn't tackle the misinformation that is out there, but it makes sure that what we as journalists are putting out is accurate and correct. The helicopter was shown there.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, if you've got a bit of institutional knowledge and experience within your newsroom, a lot of your staff will remember that helicopter shot from Libya because it was such a moment when the Libyan rebels took over and Gaddafi had fallen and that helicopter was driven off crazily down the road. So the moment it pops up, anybody with institutional knowledge in your newsroom knows that that is not from Afghanistan today. You also saw in that video just briefly one of the articles that Sanya and Victoria on my team did on the anti-vaxxer movement. And one of the interesting things when they were analysing that was the fact that, and again those headlines popped up there, there are news organisations that put out headlines that, I don't know if you remember seeing the video of a woman who was apparently sitting on a bench, minding her own business, and got arrested by the police because she was an anti-vaxxer. Well, actually, when you really looked into that story, she'd been sitting on the bench after a day of ignoring the police who were telling her to go away and stop going to protests and don't do this. So there was history there, and that was the real context. And yet, the newspaper headlines that Victoria and Sanya were looking at, and when they were doing their anti-vaxxer piece, were suggesting that this woman had just been snatched, and they were repeating the video, they were giving the links to the video and everything. So there's also, I think, the need for us not to repeat some of this stuff. And then just finally, we've got to be really, really careful when we choose to pick up on a story. And we were talking about this over dinner last night. This is a slightly awkward one because both Sky and the BBC covered the story I'm about to mention. And you may have seen it online because it was quite a clickable story about a woman who had taken down an anti-vaccination poster and had cut herself on the razor blade that was on the back of the poster. And this went everywhere. News teams covered it. And yet, actually, interestingly, the two reporters I've mentioned on my team, and you said the same for you and the people of your age group, instantly smelt a rat on that one. Social media people have been looking into this, have been realizing it's not quite all it seemed. And there's a lot more to that story. It seems there's a particularly vulnerable individual who did the original post in the background, who made up part of it and felt compelled to tell news teams that the story was bigger than it was. But I think we've got to be really, really careful before we jump on something that seems to be true before we put it out. Because if we're putting out stuff that isn't true or isn't all that it purports to be, then we undermine our own journalism, and then we add fuel to the fire of people who say, you can't trust us.
Yeah, it's acknowledging the noise, but getting to the root of the story, the basics that we were all taught kind of on day one. We're going to have another vote. Hopefully more of you would have uploaded the app, hopefully. This time, a bit of role play. Why don't you imagine you're line managing a reporter who's investigating misinformation? And what they've done is created a Facebook profile, separate from their personal account, but they have used their real name. And they want to join a closed group, and it's called We Oppose the COVID-19 Vaccine. It has more than 10,000 members. Now, in order to join, the reporter needs to answer some questions, which include, do you believe the vaccine is part of a sinister global agenda? What should they do? We've got 3 options. The first, don't join the group. Puts the reporter at risk. It's a closed space where others' information should remain private. Or answer the questions but give false responses. The level of deception is justified because there's a public interest. Or, finally, request to join the group without answering the questions. If this is unsuccessful, try the next day and then answer the questions falsely. Please vote. I was dreading it being all 33, 34. Mariana, you helped devise this.
I did.
What do you make of, firstly, what's the correct procedure?
The correct answer is the final answer, return the next day, because the expectation of privacy in a group that's got 10,000 members is low. The public interest in joining that group is high, particularly because you think that misleading and harmful information is very likely to be being spread in that group. But by leaving it for a day and seeing whether you're accepted without having to lie in those answers reduces the level of deception, and so that level of deception is justified by the public interest. And that's advice that we've devised with our editorial policy team at the BBC, with the disinformation team. I'd spend a lot of time joining Facebook groups like this. And you shouldn't be sending everyone willy-nilly into these Facebook groups, but if it's in the public interest to investigate and report on them, then that's important.
Let's follow through then. Let's add a further development. So in the group, the reporter contacts some of the members to request an interview about their beliefs, and this bears fruit, and an interview is arranged. However, one of the members the reporter's messaged posts a screen grab of the request to the whole group, and that triggers an onslaught of abusive messages. So what to do next? A, does the reporter defend themselves in the comments on the post? Does the reporter and editor then discuss the pros and cons of leaving the Facebook group, given that the reporter's now organised an interview with a consenting member? So, you know, the objective has been achieved. C, ignore it. Ignore the abuse and threats. Prepare for the interview. What do you think? Okay, so I think you're all pretty clear that you're not going to defend yourselves in the comments. You're just debating what to do. Bad idea. Yeah, don't go down that rabbit hole. Okay, Mariana, B, I mean, the majority just going with B. Do you agree?
Yes, and they're right. The best plan is to talk about how to deal with this issue, the experience of the reporter, because it can be quite scary and quite frightening receiving that level of abuse, but also the public interest of doing that interview, being able to speak to people within those groups. A good example of this was I recently did a film for Newsnight where we attended a protest and we were speaking to different people in these groups so that we could attend the rally with them and understand more, and that's crucial. But at the same time, you want to protect the reporter and you want to make sure that no one is being put at risk by remaining in that group.
Well, we'll kind of touch on that now. Thank you very much. There is an increasing antipathy towards the media. I think all of us in this room are aware of that. So investigating and reporting fake news in this climate does raise a number of concerns.
From zombies to trolls. We all know the media has a lot of haters, but our work calling out fake news presents new and particular threats. As disinformation units spring up across newsrooms and journalists become steeped in the murky world of online hate, they can find themselves on a hostile front line, starting on social media, but soon spilling into the real world.
Mariana Spring and Jeremy Vine.
None of you have reported on the truth since day one. You're complicit in crimes against humanity.
I will never play my TV like that.
See that? Asking questions, and they can fuck right off. The biggest fake news going.
Your life is going to be pure hell every minute that you're here.
But what's the best way for journalists in these relatively new roles to go about their work safely? And is infiltrating online spaces to uncover the beliefs and conversations that are going on even ethical?
It's really necessary to have a conversation about the ethics of reporting from closed spaces, in the same way as reporters have always had to think about the ethical implications of doing stories that involved undercover reporting. And I think sometimes people go, well, it's a WhatsApp group or it's a Facebook group, so what's the problem? But fundamentally, these are closed spaces, and it doesn't mean that a reporter should, move into 4chan and be like, oh, hi, I'm from the BBC. But what it does mean is that editorially, there should be a conversation about protecting staff, making sure that staff understand that you just can't wade into these spaces without having your own security locked down. You're supported for the mental health implications of doing this work.
And the implications are many. Not only do journalists in this field and in general face harassment from those who mistrust us, but women in particular can expect to get an even harder time. A study earlier this year by the UN's cultural agency UNESCO surveyed 901 journalists across 125 countries and found that misogyny often intersected with other forms of abuse to create a potent mix of hate.
It's pretty horrific seeing it all together in one big study like this. We looked at how network misogyny and gaslighting intersects with things like racism, religious bigotry, homophobia, sectarianism, and other forms of discrimination. Which threaten women journalists, and it threatens them severely and disproportionately. 73% of women journalists that we surveyed have experienced online violence. 25% of them have received threats of physical violence, such as death threats. That's quite a high number, that's 1 in 4. 20% said that they'd been attacked or abused offline in connection with online violence that they had experienced. And if white women journalists were experiencing 64% of online violence, for Jewish women journalists, it was 88% of them. For Black women journalists, it was 81% of them. Indigenous women journalists, 86%. So the numbers are extremely, they're far higher. And this is why we wanted to emphasize that intersectional threats are a key trend.
Journalists in war zones might expect to be shot at, but this is a new kind of frontline where reporters, especially female reporters, are threatened in an attempt to silence them and keep alternative narratives alive. So should we even be there?
But I would argue we do need to be in these spaces, but we don't need 100,000 journalists in these spaces. So actually, how can newsrooms collaborate when it comes to doing this sort of work? Secondly, we need to ensure that staff are protected. And third, we need to think, well, what are we trying to get out of this? And not just lurking there to find some kind of sensational clickbaity story. It's how can we understand from being there how this is going to move through the ecosystem so that when it does hit Twitter or Facebook 5 days later, somebody's like, well, actually, I saw that. It was in a Discord server 5 days ago. So it's a much bigger piece. And I would argue that the senior editors, they have to understand this world. This isn't like, oh, yeah, well, my 20-something reporters, they're all doing that. It's not for me anymore. Absolutely, senior editors have to understand what their staff are doing and how they can protect them.
That message, Deborah, at the end was pretty clear, wasn't it, in terms of having to protect and understand what your staff are going through now. How are you dealing with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, this has kind of crept up on all of us, and we've all known colleagues who have really suffered, and I think we're very conscious of it now as an industry. So in ITN, we've really been very active in this. We've worked with the DCMS. They've got a national action plan for the safety of journalists. We've taken part in that and helped build this. So there's a pack for journalists to help them proceed in this very treacherous territory with caution, but whilst protecting the information they're gathering, if there needs to be an investigation afterwards. There's work now going on so that the police are educated educated on what this means and how you tackle it. But I think, you know, Matthew and I, in fact, worked with a colleague who was involved in an investigation that angered Donald Trump's more extreme outer wing. And she came under such extreme attack, it destroyed her life for a period of time. And it's very, very real. Kathy Newman as well spoke about, you know, constant trolling. It's a very serious problem. But this is journalism that we must do. We cannot back away and not go there. Because disinformation is the greatest threat to modern democracy, and it is our job. And the comparison to a war zone is very real and legitimate in that film. So it's something, but I think we're here talking about it now, which is a good thing, and I think there's much more to come on this front.
I mean, Matthew, you alluded to this at the start of the conversation, that you've had bullets, but, you know, at you. And this is a very different type of warfare, a different type of attack.
It is, but picking up on what Deborah's saying there, I mean, look, thank God the broadcast industry and the media industry, news industry got involved in training people for going into hostile environments over the last 2 decades. And so much work has been done on that. And that's not just about how do you put your flak jacket on, when do you put it on, when do you run away from the incoming fire. It's also about the psychological trauma. There's a lot of work gone into that, quite rightly. I think now we need just as much work to go into that to train people who are working in newsrooms. Just because news editors don't see someone leave their computer. And if you're walking out onto the street into an anti-vaxxer demonstration, of course you're going to check that your staff have been trained for a riot situation. But if you're tapping away on your keyboard and going into the darker spaces on the internet, then I think everybody needs to be equipped psychologically for that. And perhaps even more importantly, because so many of them are not of my generation, they are of Mariana's generation, who are for the first time exposing themselves in a professional sense to the social media world. And just because you've grown up in a personal sense using social media, trading jokes, perhaps even, you know, some nasty stuff's happened to you online when you're at school on social media, it's not the same. Once you get faced by groups like this who actively target you, and you mentioned our colleague at NBC, I mean, there are some horrible situations people can get into. And I think actually some sort of prior training, but also acknowledgement from people like myself, Deborah, and other editors, that you do, as the last speaker there was saying, need to understand what your staff are going into in the virtual world. That's absolutely crucial.
Also, having taken the responsibility of making sure they step away from it. Yeah. At points as well.
And actually, if I might add, I mean, and Mariana, you could probably speak a bit more to this, but if you're going into dark spaces, so if you're going into conspiracy theories, if you're, I mean, you know, actually, and interestingly, I mentioned the data journalists on my team. I mean, one of them has actually struggled with COVID now. I mean, not physically struggled, but mentally struggled with COVID, because they have been working on the COVID data story for so long that it has changed their sort of view of the dangers that we face in every day. And I think we can all relate to that to a certain extent. So there are many, many different ways in which I think we need to sort of check up on people a lot more than perhaps we might have used to have done in the past.
Mariana, can you tell us some of your experiences and kind of how you deal with it, how you cope with it?
Yeah, I mean, I've found myself very, very regularly targeted with death threats, rape threats, really vile abuse on social media, and that's across social media. It'll be in my Instagram messages or my Facebook messages or on Twitter, and it's certainly escalated in the time that I've been covering this topic. And I think in some ways what's so important about my reporting, that I'm a real person, I'm not a kind of nameless byline or fact checker. I'm someone that they see on telly or they hear from or who they know.
But you're also attached to the BBC, which adds a
whole
whole
which is
other...
like a whole nother.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think as a consequence, being able to weaponize what makes disinformation go so viral in the first place, revealing its human cost, telling stories that people can relate to and are drawn to and are interested in. People get in touch with me all the time to tell me about how conspiracies or trolling or disinformation are impacting their own lives. And that rapport is so important, but it's that rapport that leaves me open to this really extreme online hate. And I'm really lucky that particularly my team at the BBC and my editors, one of my editors, Mike Wendling, has kind of had a lot of experience with this himself, and that's been hugely beneficial to me, and I've felt very, very well supported by the BBC. I'm working on an investigation at the moment, which is all about online hate and tracking down my own trolls and stuff like that, and I find in some ways that a good coping mechanism, being able to actually cover this myself. I'm lucky in some ways that I've managed, I think, to an extent, to keep my personal life separate from my professional life. But I hear from so many people, more broadly, you know, members of the public, but also journalists who don't know what to do when they're targeted with this vicious hate. And it's not just reporters like me who cover disinformation and trolling who experience this. It's also reporters who are covering health or who are presenting on regional news who have got in touch with me to say...
And breakfast.
And breakfast, and you. But who have got in touch with me to say, oh, anti-vax activists are sending me death threats, they're targeting my grandma or a picture of my cat. I don't know what to do. And I think it's so important that it's not just the specialist reporters and journalists covering this area who have support, but actually more broadly everyone who is equipped to deal with this stuff, and that the systems that are in place, either at social media sites or the police or otherwise, take this really seriously, because I worry for my physical safety, I really do.
Yeah, understandably. I have noticed a change over time, and you will be more aware of this, of the advice you're being given. Because at one point it was like, oh, ignore it, or just block them, or mute them, let them shout into the ether, which really isn't helpful at all. How's that advice changed?
I think it's changed a lot, particularly over the course of the pandemic. It's something that I found very unhelpful. I remember being told, oh, just log off social media. It's like my whole job is investigating social media, so it's not really an option.
We won't name names.
But I think it's really positive how that attitude has changed and how people accept that it's really important to highlight this isn't normal. I remember saying to my editor the very first time I experienced this very vicious pile-on of threats, abuse, you know, people saying, I'm going to come and kill you, I want you hanged, I want you executed, I'm going to come to your house and rape you, really extreme stuff. And people saying, actually, me going, this is really not normal, this is completely abnormal. When I tell anyone who I know, my family, my friends about this stuff, they're like, what on earth is going on? And I think that we shouldn't accept that this is acceptable or normal. And
yeah, we do tend to normalise it amongst our own conversations, don't we? We almost like laugh at the kind of ways they want to.
Yeah, totally. And so in some ways that's a coping mechanism, but I think that if we take this seriously, both newsrooms and the other systems that are in place to protect journalists covering this beat and other beats online, then we're able to actually do that to protect people. Because if we just dismiss it or we say, well, let's not amplify it, let's not this or that, we're actually ignoring the real world threat that a lot of this poses. And not just myself, but a number of the journalists I speak to are so worried. I'm worried walking home. I'm worried being at home on my own. I'm worried about all of those things.
Okay, with that in mind, is it worth it?
It's really worth it, which probably sounds completely counter to what I've just said, but for telling the stories about the human cost, for speaking to the people who are victims of this online disinformation, of trolling, being able to shine a light and expose the impact that that's having on them, and being able to highlight how this works, to explain to audiences, listeners, viewers, how these tactics work, how they're being conned or manipulated or misled, holding those different social media platforms or government or otherwise accountable. That is just totally crucial, and I think this is a growing beat and it's so important, and if it's at the cost of me receiving abuse, then it's worth that. I wish it wasn't, but I think unfortunately at the moment it is.
Let's move on to our last section. Final vote, so it wasn't a waste of time downloading the app if you did. Imagine a friend sends you a message and it's full of conspiracy theories. Here's the message. Hey Steve, this is the video I mentioned. The woman in it is a scientist. She knows her stuff. I believe her more than I believe the rest of them. WHO, Fauci, Gates. We need to have a proper chat about this sometime. So how do you respond? Do you say, surely you're not falling for that nonsense? The next thing you'll tell me is that the world is run by alien lizards. I never thought you'd become one of the crazy conspiracy theorists. Or, hi, I don't think I will watch it, thanks, as I'm not into that kind of stuff, but I know you take it seriously, so let's agree not to talk about it, as I don't want to get into any arguments. I'll respect your views, you respect mine. Deal? Which one would you choose? So a third of you are pretty combative, eh? Basically, if your friends mess up, they're out. The rest of you, okay, sitting on the fence, perhaps, you know, nice and calm. You saw Dr. Jovan Byford from the Open University in one of our former films. He set this scenario for us, and here's his thinking behind the responses. So he's saying this is dismissive of the sender. I'm sure you all realise that, and their views. So This one is at least likely to keep the conversation going, and it's the most likely to lead to a breakdown of communication or an argument, which obviously most of us don't want. B, choosing to create a taboo around topics within families is a legitimate strategy. I mean, think about immigration, Brexit. There are so many families divided, and they just say, well, we're not talking about this now. However, Steve has effectively legitimised Sophie's conspiracy theory by referring to it as a respectable and legitimate point of view. Avoid this, because it reinforces the conspiracy theory by presenting claims within it as a matter of opinion rather than fact. So, be partially okay. I'll be fair, we haven't given you the full picture. There is a third way, and this is what Dr. Byford says. There's this response. Hi. I think there are a few videos like this being circulated at the moment. I'll tell you what, I'll watch it, send me a couple more links to videos, websites that you found interesting, then we can meet up, talk about it over a drink. How does that sound? Now, the reason Dr. Byford likes this approach is because it's neutral. It remains neutral towards Sophie's views, shows no sign of endorsement or dismissal, encourages conversation, and postpones the debate to a more suitable face-to-face setting. It also encourages Sophie to share material that can later perhaps be debunked by Steve, and also engage with disconfirming evidence. So we're talking about engaging with people. And engaging with people who seem to have been dazzled by disinformation, it can be difficult. We've all had those frustrating conversations, I'm sure. They can be lost and won in equal measure. And there is a well-known metaphor for that.
From zombies to trolls to, well, bunny rabbits. Or rather, rabbit holes. That often used metaphor to describe where people end up when they start falling for conspiracies and disinformation. Lost in a complicated world where a feeling of powerlessness has been exacerbated by the pandemic, and lockdown has given them more time to seek out neat answers for society's ills. There may even be a sociable side, as online communities are built around like-minded ideas. It can lead to action, peaceful marches maybe, or vengeance against masts, or vengeance against masks.
Destroy them!
And there's nothing like putting a face to a meme.
Stand with us, the people!
But the consequences for those lost to conspiracy can be painful, particularly for friends and family.
This is all a lie, this COVID-19!
Thousands of people are taking her to be this source of truth, and I wish I could tell them all, my mum is not the person that you think she is.
It pains me to say that, but he is not the same person that I used to know. I mean, he's not my sweet boy from years ago.
Showing those we care about a way out of the rabbit warren is no easy task. Nobody likes to be told they're wrong, and they might even be getting a kick out of it.
It is a huge driver of self-esteem. It gives the believers in conspiracy theories this belief that they're the ones who have superior knowledge about how the world works.
But most aren't actually hardline conspiracy theorists, nor hardline skeptics.
So some people may engage with conspiracy theories in a slightly sort of ironic and jokey way. Some of them might do because not because they believe in the literal truth of conspiracy theories, but because they see them as capturing some broader truth about inequalities, about the bad distribution of power or money in society and so on. Or they see themselves as broad-minded and as needing to engage with all perspectives, including those that might seem outrageous or far-fetched to some.
Of course, a good deal of sharing is done in the spirit of passing on information, with the sender maybe unaware they're disseminating fake news.
Have a cracking Christmas at Woolworths!
And perhaps more illustrative than stories that make us worried or angry are those that make us smile. Consider the news last year that Woolworths was about to make a return to the high street. That went viral, as joyful readers took a pick-and-mix approach to the stories they fell for. And never mind the rabbits, what about the well-meaning wombats? Apparently they were herding animals into their burrows to take shelter from the Australian bushfires. Spoiler, they weren't. But it seems there's nothing like a good news story to make us lower our guard against fake news. It just needs to have a truthiness about it. After all, we live in a world where we're kind of truthful, but not quite, especially on social media.
everyone, to a greater or lesser extent, is presenting a truthy version of themselves online. So we all semi-fictionalize ourselves, enhance the greater parts of ourselves online. And social media is a network, it's a web made up of all these semi-fictionalized truthy versions of each other, which is generally accepted to be the norm. And it's very easy in that instance for people to inject truthy versions of news or truthy versions of events or things that appear to be like the truth to certain people who are aligned or amenable to those ideas.
The fact is, we're all susceptible. We're all biased in some way. We all have worldviews. But the connection between the spread of both good and bad fake news is that it triggers an emotional response. That means links and likes and comments and eyeballs. Which other industry is after those things?
If it makes people feel something, fearful, angry, sad, or I was right, if it makes them feel smug, then all of us are more likely to have our critical faculties drop and we're more likely to engage. And so it's not to say that newsrooms should dumb down, it's not to say that we should be more or less emotional in our output, but we need to understand the kind of the ecosystem, the ways that audiences are coming to our content, because they're coming to it in a pretty different way than they were 10 years ago. And that's why the other side, it's not a great term, but the other side understands the psychology of our audiences, I would argue, much more than we do.
And we've all learnt a new word, truthy. Truthy. I think it's going to be quite useful to use. You'd have noticed Deborah Turness has had to leave, but in her place, I have Dr. Sander van der Linden, who's Professor of Social Psychology from Cambridge University. Welcome. Welcome, Sander. Perhaps I'll get you to pick up on this, actually. We can appreciate why people share certain information, but why are people sharing information that they're not sure about? You know, aside of the bad actors and the extremists, we're talking about, I think, mainly people in the middle, aren't we? Not on the edges, not on the extremes, but in the middle who are kind of being sucked into this.
Yeah, so there's really two kind of big theories about why people share fake news. And I think one, it has to do with inattention. And so we think of the brain as having limited computing capacity, and right? And so sometimes we're overwhelmed and there's too much information and not enough time to sort of sift through everything. And we rely on heuristics or rules of thumb to judge information. So one heuristic is how familiar something is. If I say 2 + 2, most people think 4 because that's a repeated association. So the more often you repeat something, the more likely the brain is to think that it's true because it uses fluency as a mechanism for truth. And so the more misinformation is repeated, the more likely you are to think it's true. So, I've heard that somewhere, I might share it. There's something called the interesting if true effect. That is a finding which suggests that people might think, oh, I'm not sure if this is true, but if it were to be true, it would be interesting for my audience to know about. So that might be kind of a motivation. And then, then there's, people just don't always think before they post something, and it's very human to not be able to attend to everything, and so we're selective. But the other theory is much more nefarious, which suggests that our brains are motivated, deeply motivated, by the political, social, religious, and spiritual worldviews that we have, and so we post content to reaffirm who we are and what's our identity, what are the groups that we belong to. If I'm, let's say, conservative, I might post something nasty about liberals because, I can score points with my group. If I'm a liberal, I might post something nasty about conservatives. And so fake news can play into that. Vaccination plays into worldviews about medicine, and natural medicine and religion plays a role in things like vaccination and evolution. So really it depends on people's worldview and how strong they identify with a piece of content. And so I think both explanations are true. It depends on what situation people find themselves in to see what kind of explanation is more likely. And that is important because it tells us something about the types of interventions that are going to be effective or ineffective.
Talk to me about the research that you're doing into this area.
Yeah, so we've heard a lot about fact-checking and debunking, which is good, but we've tried to sort of pioneer this idea of what we call pre-bunking. So not debunking, but pre-bunking. And the idea is that, if you're always running behind the facts, if you're always being reactive by trying to debunk something, it's often too little too late, and right, you can't scale fact-checking to the same level as as misinformation. And so pre-bunking is preemptively refuting false content for people. So you forewarn people and you preemptively refute it through a process we call psychological inoculation. So it follows the vaccine metaphor exactly. You inject people with a weakened dose of the fake news virus preemptively so that people can build up cognitive or intellectual antibodies against fake news. And we've been testing this and trialing this. We've implemented it now with the Cabinet Office, the World Health Organization, the United Nations, the Department of Homeland Security during the 2020 election in the United States, social media companies like Facebook and Google. And so what we've done is we've taken this approach and we've created a format, kind of a virtual needle that you can deliver this in. And so it's videos, but it's games. We have a lot of games which we call Disinformation Simulators. People can create their own conspiracy theory. They control someone in controlled, weakened form so that they understand the techniques that are being used to manipulate people preemptively, so that when they're hit with disinformation, and this is how we test them week after week, we follow up with people and attack them, quote unquote, with misinformation. And we find that people have become more resilient because now they have the intellectual antibodies they need to resist it. And so one important thing that I'll add is we don't tell people what to believe. We don't tell them what the facts are. This is why it's different from fact checking. We don't say this is true, this is false. We say this is the manipulation technique that's being used so that people can now identify it for themselves. And though the Sophie example was great, because my response would have been that this is actually a fake expert technique, what we call the fake expert technique. You take somebody who has credentials and use them to say something about which they have no expertise, or maybe their credentials are false. And so you can try to talk to people about these manipulation techniques like polarization, using emotions, conspiracy theories. And this conforms what we call sort of a broader spectrum vaccine, because now you've not only vaccinated people against a specific conspiracy, but they understand the building blocks of the whole thing. So now when they see different conspiracies, they kind of understand that they're being duped.
Do you know, we can put this, I suppose, into a real person, Mariana, because there's a woman you know called Catherine, who kind of got sucked into this, but thought she was quite a reasonable, kind of forensic person to some extent, but lost her way. Explain her.
Yeah, so Catherine is someone I interviewed who was an ardent anti-vaxxer before the pandemic. She used to believe a number of very extreme conspiracy theories about vaccines, and she gave a very powerful interview where she explained both why she believed that stuff. She put it down to an anti-establishment upbringing, a quite deep distrust, often legitimately, in institutions that she felt had let her down, had let her family down. When the internet came along and she suddenly could look at everything on YouTube and on Facebook and elsewhere, she started to find herself falling into this rabbit hole. And once she had accepted that worldview, that she couldn't trust anything, that everything was part of this grand conspiracy, she began to muddle often legitimate political criticisms that she might have had with these extreme worldviews. And what it took for her was actually, there's this phrase that people who believe conspiracies often use, I do my own research. And she began to realize that maybe she wasn't really doing her own research, she was doing half of her own research. She was applying great skepticism to one side and not to the other sources she was looking at. And when she began to realize that actually people were trying to mislead her as well on either side, she felt empowered to a point and able to reject these extreme beliefs and make an informed decision. And I think a lot of this is about agency. I find from interviewing people who attend rallies who believe this stuff, and I always think it's important to approach this with empathy. I think it's really unhelpful to dismiss people as stupid or bonkers or bizarre or misguided, because I just don't think that's the case. I think people are being often exploited because they have legitimate distrust, concerns, fears, and they are being misled. And being able to expose those tactics and understand why and how that's happening is crucial, and I think is the most effective way we can report on this.
Matthew, it's really interesting. Just a final word, really, on empathy. I was thinking back to the first film we saw where there was the reporter in the protest, and it is so tempting when you're faced with someone who, on a personal level, you think is absolutely nutso, and just spouting stuff that you just think, can you hear yourself? But equally, you have to remain just absolutely neutral and ask the simplest questions. It's just going back to basics. A simple question just such as, why?
Which was the whole point of answer C in the last scenario, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That actually, I mean, I've had friends come to me because I am a journalist and say, what should I make of this video? And what I then find interesting is that because we all work in this industry and because we're all interested in it, that a lot of our cognitive process, what you're talking about, a lot of the way in which our minds work when something pops up, is natural. And I've actually found myself almost training my friends to interpret things. And I think actually I'd sort of chime with what you were saying there in the work that you're doing. What I think's absolutely crucial is that as journalists, as television makers, as content makers, we start to show our workings. Because if we can show the way in which we get to the conclusions we get to, if we can show why we believe the vaccine to be safe, if we can show why we don't believe conspiracy theory X is real, if we can show the stages we've gone through to verify that, then we can start to rebuild trust. I think that's absolutely crucial. And another thing I'd say, again, picking up off what you said, let's not forget, I mean, those of us who work in news are news junkies. I imagine, I don't know, let's not do a survey, but I imagine most of us believe the vaccine is safe in this room because we've taken in that news. Many people don't take in the news in the way in which we do. So repetition, we shouldn't be afraid to repeat the stories, and this is something that you do so much, is just repeating what we know to be true and why we know it to be true.
Do you still get invitations to dinner parties by your friends? if you're just explaining stuff to them all the time. I'm only teasing.
I do workshops, not dinner parties.
Okay, fine. All round to Matthew's tonight.
It's very dull.
I'm teasing, I'm absolutely teasing. Sandra, thank you. Matthew, thank you. Mariana, thank you. Stay safe all, and thank you very much for your insights.